We got a problem. Intelligence is going to zero. Okay, that was way too long pause. I wanted you to react before I said something.
I was pausing for dramatic.
Oh, it's
Okay.
too much dramatic.
Intelligence is going to zero. You're going to have to, expand upon that one a little bit. I'm the marketing guy. You're not supposed to be building new buzzwords, but what do you mean by that, John?
Okay, so there's a lot of conversation that's happening right now in the AI marketplace around the use of large language models and their ability to start to reason, do a lot of white collar knowledge based work. And just in the last couple of weeks, with some of the announcements around the Llama 3 open source models, as well as the new OpenAI GPT-4o mini model, these models are becoming ridiculously inexpensive. And, there's a common phrase that's coming up a lot now, which is that, this is the worst it's ever going to be with this technology. And what I mean by that is the quality is, as low as it is going to be. The models are as stupid as they are going to be right now compared to where they will be in 10 years, right? The same thing could have been said about TV technology back in the 1950s. That was the lowest resolution a TV was ever going to be. Now we've got 8K TVs and 50K video walls and all of this stuff. And so when I say intelligence is going to zero, what I'm really talking about is that this concept around using AI to do complex mental thinking is really starting to take hold. And we're very nascent in the industry, but it's happening. And the cost of this stuff is ridiculously low compared to what it would cost in human hours to do the same task less efficiently. I'll give you a good example. There's a new cool technology that we're building here in-house at Iternal right now that's around retrieval augmented generation and our Blockify capabilities. And for those who don't know, Blockify is a data ingestion process that improves the accuracy of a large language model by 40 times until virtually eliminate hallucinations. But you can do some really cool things with this retrieval augmented generation and passing in the right information into the large language model. And there are some technologies that we've built that are focused around indexing of that content so that you can get more pertinent and relevant information based on the types of questions that you're asking. So it doesn't give you, something that's maybe out of domain or out of scope based on what you're looking for. And just recently, using some of the new powerful technologies from some of the providers like OpenAI, it costs about $50 to index, say, 5,000 paragraphs of text. With the release of the new Llama 3 models, as well as the GPT-4o mini models, the same indexing cost is zero if you have a computer powerful enough to run the Llama 3 locally. But if you want to still pay a cloud service provider for that indexing, my bill was 37 cents.
Yeah, that's changed dramatically, even over the last year. I remember you were talking, I was asking about cost of operations, cost of just the using the technology, and we were always having to balance that. Like, what's the cost of basically renting the intelligence? And it's interesting, history does repeat itself. And I'm a little older than you. I'm not that much older than you, but yeah, I'm older than you. We've seen this before. It happens with other technologies. The one that came to mind when you were speaking to me about now that I understand intelligence is going to zero, the cost, the economics, it really is. You're not going to have to pay for it. You're going to have to figure out how to use it. But like hard drives, remember storage? I used to read these things. I didn't do the research before the call, but at one time, like a gig of storage was like astronomically expensive. And when the rise of the gig economy, gigabytes are like free. Like, what storage? Like, it's not really the cost of the hard drives. It's the intelligence that moves the data around, and the cost and security. It's the software. And so that happens again and again. And by the way, I'm glad intelligence is going to be free, because that opens up the world to many new creations. And so the thing I wanted to ask you, it's been all over the news, is what Zuckerberg has done. Mark, man, just put a shot across the bow and said, hey, check this out, and just open source this whole open versus closed models out there, changing the economics and kind of where businesses are going to play. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's awesome. I think that he's done a whole rehabilitation of his overall image. If you think about
100%.
the media and press and the issues that Facebook has had over the years, and just generally social media across the board, from the societal impacts, the data and privacy concerns, all of that stuff definitely created a lot of churn and dark clouds around him and social media in general. But I think that I'm thrilled to see what he's doing with open sourcing these large language models. And I think that certainly in our time today, it's making a big impact. But I think that that's one of those historic things, along with Elon Musk buying Twitter, now X. Right. These things are going to go down in the history books holistically as true game changers for hopefully a better and more positive society. And we look back on it and see this as being an inflection point, because to your point, the democratization that we're seeing of this intelligence and making it effectively zero cost or near zero cost, just the opportunities that opens up from an education standpoint, from a personal research standpoint. There are more and more posts about companies who will be, billion-dollar companies with one employee or no employees. And, we're not there yet, obviously, but that's what's coming here. And it's happening fast. And, I think there are probably two audiences that are looking at what we're talking about here today. It's going to be the AI enthusiasts and just techies in general, but it's also going to be the enterprise people. And yes, the enterprise adoption of these technologies is still pretty slow, right? We're in 1995 internet timeframe, I think, with this, but it's happening and it's accelerating fast. And I think the acceleration and adoption of these new technologies is shortening in time in terms of getting from point A to point B versus some of the past major transformations that we've seen. But it's still going to take a couple of years.
Yeah, and you think about the concept of what's slow versus fast adoption. It's getting faster, and I know a lot of the big enterprises are worried, are they falling behind? Sometimes it's okay not to be first. Yeah, it's okay to be a fast follower in these areas, and learn and learn as we go. And you're right. It's, as we talked in the last podcast, it's not going anywhere. It's here with us forever. And we're still learning the best ways to deploy this technology. Speaking of new technology, I know you've been playing, and some of the engineers have been playing with the new voice release of OpenAI voice release, so that's in alpha. We talk about open and closed, and you can talk about OpenAI and kind of make a joke, but they still have great technology as well. What are you seeing over there?
Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting things that are happening, but one of the most fascinating things just on this intelligence going to zero concept, the speed of ideation is so much faster, right? The ability to do complex processing. Like, I'll give you an example. We're doing a bunch of training content for Iternal right now, where we're training our partners and our customers on how to go to market, how to use, how to consume this technology. We're at the point now where I can sit on a Zoom, record a video of me going through a slide deck presentation and a training module that's like a 30 to 60-minute training module. And we can take that transcript, and with some fancy prompt engineering that we've put together, we can run that through that entire body transcript. It's like, a couple thousand words. And out the other side of that, I'll have a perfect list of test questions, multiple choice, that we can incorporate into that training module. And in addition to that, I can take all of that narration and guidance and structure, and we can blockify that, and we can turn it into an FAQ knowledge base and chatbot that a partner or a subject matter expert or a salesperson can go to, type in the information, click a button. The other cool thing that we can do, this is a new one, you may not even know that we're doing this now because I haven't told people, is we can take all of the information around our use cases and how to apply the technologies that we've developed to specific verticals, specific departments of an organization, And we're at the point now where I can type a 5-word summary of that use case, and it will create the value proposition, the problem statement that the customer is most likely experiencing, the solution that our technology can provide, as well as the metrics, the ROI, and the overall benefit and outcome of that solution for that particular use case in that particular industry vertical. All with
How,
5 words.
how
of
accurate? Like how much re-editing did you have to do?
Like it's all semantic editing. It's not because we're using our blocks as that foundational data source of what our capabilities are. It's not making up things that our products can't do. It's more about, well, I'd really like to say it this way a little bit differently because of how it's being talked about or how I know the customer is going to receive it. But we've also created a feedback loop for this stuff. So anytime I perfect one of these AI generated responses, we feed that back into the system so that it's able to learn from that. And going forward, it will sound more and more like the way that I would want it to respond. But we've got a partner that's in the telco space that's bringing like 15 use cases to telco. And all 15 of the use cases that we responded to were first pass AI generated. And that's something that I had to do manually for years in the past, and it was tedious. It was frustrating.
We all have.
It was awful, right?
I mean, it takes a lot of time to do a great response and a good response. I mean, to do it well, it does. But now you can compress the time.
I mean, you type it in, you press a button. 20 seconds later, you've got the full thing that you can read. Maybe you changed a couple of words, and that's it. And it's all of the information that the person needs. And I mean, it's game changing. I've got another use case that we're doing that's pretty cool around our use of AI code development platforms. We're just starting to touch this last week with my engineering team. So there's some early experimentation. We could talk about that in a little bit.
Are you talking about no code with coders?
No, I'm talking about where you can use AI to help you do your code for you.
I know. And I think it's funny that the coders are cheating now. They're cheating. No, I want you to write the code. Like you went to school for that. You studied that. No I know. Way. We always talk about it. AI is here to stay no matter what you do. You got to learn how to coexist with it, whether you're a marketer, a coder, a sales, work smart. Yeah. You all have a lot to do.
The key factors in my mind for that are, it's the big ones, right? We provide enterprise software. So it's really important that our intellectual property is preserved. So 100%. When we were looking at these different tools, we wanted to pick one that had good IP protections. We also wanted to control which model it uses. And we've got, data protection agreements in place for if we're using a cloud model, we want to make sure that we can also plug it into a local model if we want to do that. So having the flexibility to decide where that data goes and what we actually put through it is really important.
Exactly what our customers want from us. Sounds very familiar, John.
Yeah, right.
The other thing I wanted to ask you is you were talking about new features, and this comes up on calls, and I know some of our existing clients and future clients have always asked, hey, I don't really like to be on camera, but I'm asked to be on camera a lot. When can we just have the digital version of me and have my scripting team write it where it looks authentic? And I know it's coming, but it's not quite there yet. We for those on the call, one of our biggest offerings is hyper-personalized marketing and media, and John's developed an amazing technology to do video marketing and hyper-personalization at scale. It's one of the things I used extensively with him before joining the company. But we all know the AI is getting better and better at digital twins, digital humans, but it's not there yet. So I'm just gonna put you on the spot. When do you think it's going to be there where we could be on this podcast and people may not know it's not us actually recording it?
Well, so I think I break it down into 2 use cases for the technology. So use case 1 would be what I would call like puppeting. And what I mean by that is the way that you look on your camera today or the way that I look,
right?
That could actually be a digital version of you that is puppeted by somebody else.
I just took my glasses off. I just want to make sure people know I'm not AI. I don't know if they can, just making sure we're real.
Yeah. So, but eventually the AI will be able to do that too.
I
But
know.
the puppeting is interesting because it's also freaky. But people think about like they've got their own alternative persona. Like if you think about gamers, right? This is big in the gaming space where you've got an avatar, you load out your character with whatever design you want, and like that's you in the virtual world. Well, that technology today, while it's not, widespread available, does exist to the point where I could make myself look like I have more hair or, whatever it is that, makes me happy as an individual when I appear on these calls. And like, that's pretty interesting because like, from my perspective, I'm very comfortable wearing fancy clothes when I need to be in fancy meetings and things like that. It's fine. But eventually you're not going to have to do that. Like you could show up in a sweatpants and whatever kind of shirt you wanted, and you would have a digital version of you that's in a suit and tie, and your hair's all slicked back and whatever, like top professional look that is appearing on your Zoom or your Teams meeting, but then you're casual in real life on the call. And so I think that's fascinating. There's obviously concerns around like the impersonation
Right.
component of that, but like that'll get worked out the way that everything else that's new and innovative gets worked out over time. But then so that's puppeting. The second use case is around the actual generation and synthesis of content from text. And that's not quite as far along as the puppeting is, because the thing about the puppeting is you have a source reference of the mouth movements, of the head motion, of all this stuff, and it's literally a direct mapping of the pixels through an AI neural network that determines how that works. It's more complicated than that, but that's kind of the high level. And so that's easier to do a one for one. What is harder is taking a text input and inferring everything about how much movement of the head, what the teeth are going to look like over time. That's
And
about
that is what
maybe.
I'm really interested in because I think that for people that are hyper creative or creative at heart that love to write, script out things, to have that come to life on a screen will be so, you're
Oh,
going to
I'm
see
super
so
excited
much.
about it. There's so much potential, and I haven't done it yet, but my background with the corporate film production and the music videos and those epic cinematic things that I used to do, um, I know that I'll go down a rabbit hole and spend way too much time, and I've got so many things I'm trying to balance. But what I used to do with the film production stuff, making these epic music videos, cinematic, true, artistic stuff, not people playing instruments. There's just so much that I could do with all this new AI video generation stuff. And I've got a couple of music videos that I never got to do because I switched businesses, but and they were very expensive. I wanted to do something up in like the Alps, like the
Yeah.
mountains and the snow, and it was a two-part music video between doing it in the Alps and doing it in like the Sahara Desert, and it was going to be this like trying epic journey that somebody's going on trying to save their family from pain and suffering and all this stuff. It is a cool concept, and it was about duality of like the cold and the hot of these two very inhospitable places and the struggles that people go through for the ones that they love. But it also requires a lot of money and a lot of equipment to go to those places. And then I got to tell you, I did one video in the desert and it was brutal. And we were like pretty close to civilization. It was out in the middle of Big Bend area in Texas, but that was tough. And so, going to a place where it's more inhospitable is challenging. But now through AI, like you could actually put that together. Now, for me personally, a lot of the enjoyment of that was just doing it, like actually
Right.
physically being there. So you kind of lose all of that aspect of it when you're doing it through the AI, but you can still create the thing. And there's this thing called pre-visualization in the film space, which is what you do when you're planning out how you want to set up your scenes and things like that. And
Kind of like
this is the time.
storyboarding in the
Yeah,
movie.
it's
Can
it's
you
the
imagine
next.
storyboards now? You could actually go, here, this almost looks real.
Yeah.
That would give the actors and the people participants just a whole different visualization of the director's
Yep.
vision.
Well, and so what the logical progression in the film space is, first you do what's called a shot list, which is I want a close up on Ethan's face for this particular shot. Then the next step is you take that shot list and you turn it into a storyboard. And that storyboard would be, a crayon drawing basically of this is Ethan's face, epic shot of him wearing his glasses with him squinting seriously into the camera or whatever it is. Then that is taken, and for the really large budget films, they then put that through the previs process where you get a 3D like animator to do a rough block outline. It wouldn't look anything like you personally, but they just get like a generic male avatar and they do that camera motion on that person. Now what you can do is you can sketch out on a piece of paper, like a drawing. You could take a piece of paper with, a circle and a smiley face, and you could hold that up in front of the camera, and you could then run that through an AI image generator and give it a prompt and say, epic cinematic, white male, slick back gray hair, black sunglasses with an explosion going on behind him. It would generate that. You'd have 100 different versions that you could look at. You'd say, I like number 37. You then take that and you put it into one of these generative AI video processing applications, and you could generate 100 different versions of that camera motion and the explosion. And maybe you want him to like look dramatically into the camera or something, right? So, and then you could pick, I want exactly that one. And now that's your previs, and it's almost entirely photorealistic. It's exactly the look and style that you want. And either, eventually we're just going to be able to leave it there and you won't even have to film the person. But, for those who want to create the film and do that, then the next step is you actually get Ethan with all of that stuff and the black leather jacket and the explosion behind him, and you record it for real. So, going back to your question, though, I think that at least for corporate work, generating this video from just text of us, presenter doing good motion, good presentation, but relatively static, we're probably about 12 to 18 months away from that happening, which is
Not very long. It's going to be here before you know it. It's crazy. And it shows you how fast we talked in the last podcast, like what we're dealing with now is the worst it's ever going to be. Yeah. And it's just going to continue to get better. One of the other, let's start like talking about how this AI business is evolving. And it's weird. Like we've talked about when AI hit the scene, it's like this thought process, you have to have these massive data centers to get the weights and measurements and the LLMs to do what they can do magically. Thank you, Zuckerberg, for doing that for free for us. But there's a new trend. The models are getting smaller. They're starting to be optimized, and they're starting to be embedded at edge-based devices. That's a whole new thing that I don't think it's really not out in the market. It's for the people like us that are there, but it's starting to come to fruition with a lot of our engineers are starting to play with it. What do you think about this trend of edge AI?
So I think it ties into a couple of things, and it ties into something that you were just mentioning and asking me about before that I didn't answer yet, which is the open AI voice capability. And that is very closely related to the edge AI. That's still being processed in the cloud because it's very compute intensive. But as we're seeing, all of this stuff is starting to shrink down. So in the last couple of days, OpenAI released their voice interactive capability, which, at least according to them, when they announced it originally with a demo, it's now starting to be available for people to actually test out.
It's still alpha release though, right?
Yeah. It's a voice first model, and you can actually prompt it by speaking to it, and it will generate back voice as its native response. And I saw a video on X today that was just really interesting. The person asked it to count to 10 as fast as it could. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And it says, now, then the person says, good job. Now do that, but do it 1 through 50. And it says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and it keeps on going. And then when it gets to 30, it goes to take a breath. And then it goes 31, 32, 33. And so like, it's just so interesting to see how it's incorporating very human responses, like even, the fact that it needs to breathe and where. And that's not something that they're like coding in to it to say, hey, if anybody ever asks you to count to 50 as fast as you can, breathe between 30 and 31. Right? Like that's not how this stuff is set up. There are just an infinite number of scenarios that you'd have to plan for to get it to do that. And so, when you combine that kind of concept with some of the other types of AI, generative AI things that are happening, specifically the video generative AI stuff. What people are talking about now that I think is really interesting is they're talking about video generative AI becoming a neural network / machine learning model of the world. Because what you really need to understand to be able to synthesize believable, high quality video content is you need to be able to understand physics. You need to be able to understand how people's joints move, right? These different things that are encoded in our reality, the AI needs to learn and understand those so that they don't have somebody's arm going backwards. Like sometimes you'll see if you use any of these video Gen AI tools today and you upload like a person's face or a person walking or something like that, they'll like phase in and out of themselves where like first they'll be walking towards you with, seeing the face of the human, but then like halfway through the video, their like face will warp into itself and you'll start seeing the back of the head, or you'll have somebody else like come out Matrix style from their body, and then you have one person that turns into two people, like they like divide. Like that's an example of where the AI is today, not understanding the limitations of our physical reality. But as it gets better, what's going to happen is it's going to start understanding that no, you can't have a person's face warp into the back of their head. And no, you can't have one person split out into two people. And you can't have the person's elbow go in that other direction. That doesn't work. And what that's really doing behind the scenes is, or at least the theory is, it's encoding the limitations of our physical reality. So there's a lot of just fascinating stuff like that that's happening in the world today, in the world of AI. And that is, not only is it the worst it's ever going to be, as we've said multiple times today, but the other thing that's interesting is it's also the most computationally intensive that it's going to be for that level of performance. If you look back at Llama 2, which was the previous open source model, state of the art, that Meta released about a year ago, maybe a couple, like 10 months ago, I don't know the exact date, but in that time, we've gone from something that was halfway decent in performance to something that is equivalent performance of the state of the art closed sourced open AI models for the same amount of computation required. The computation didn't get bigger. It stayed the same for the interesting thing about these models is it's not a linear performance difficulty improvement. It's logarithmic, which means, to get from 0 to 80%, it requires, say, 5 units of compute. To go from 80% to 90%, it requires another 5 units of compute. And it starts to plateau off to the point where you get to 100% quality. And, then it gets infinitely more difficult each iteration. So, with that in mind, I think the fascinating thing is if we look 2 or 3 or 4 generations in the future, and that could be 6 months between the releases of these models, it could be a year between the releases of these models, you're going to have 4 or 5 times potentially better compute with each generation, 4 to 5 times better quality with the same level of compute. And that means that to get the level of quality from last generation's models, you need 1/10 of the compute or 1/5 of the compute, which means that between combining that reduction in intensity with the fact that our phone chips and our processors are still getting better, still getting more advanced, you're having these things converge. And pretty soon you're going to have the ability to do all of this inferencing locally on your device versus having it sent up to the cloud. And that means that you're going to have AI across all these devices. I hope this doesn't happen, but you could have a large language model in your refrigerator, right? Internet of Things didn't ever really take off, but like that's the kind of thing that's going to start to happen as this technology becomes more available.
Yeah, they talk about it now, like the training, the current state of where we are today in the industry. Training costs a lot of money. Inferencing is where you make your money, and you think about it from an economic standpoint. Um, as I think about 5, 10 years in the future, there will be our devices. God knows what that's going to look like, and how they keep going faster and faster. And that as the code and the technology, it always happens. They get more efficient. Engineers figure out how to run things, do more with less. That's going to continue. That trend will continue to where my children, when they're in the workforce, they could have a AI on their laptop, local resident. And I think about this, and it's going to happen because people are going to study this in schools and learn how to harness and train and basically shape their own agent. And where they're going to have, like, I read an article about this that got a lot of interest about this. We talked about the one-person business where you have agents that you've trained digital to do what you know how to do, and they're really good at it. And you would literally have agents that are pretty good at doing maybe video production, sound, review, and they're yours. Yep. They're not open AIs. They're John Handy, Ethan Woods, customized, IP protected. And I want to talk a little bit more about data protection. I'm kind of using this, but I think about that. Like, can you imagine the creators, the workers of the future? They may show up to a job interview and going, all right, I know you're really good. Tell me about how good you are with the AIs and how good is your AI? Mm-hmm. I mean, that I see that future. Maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's 20 years where you could be interviewed not only based on how well you use the AI, but how good is your AI?
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I think that's definitely something that I can see happening, and I don't think it's going to be that far away. I think
I said the classic 10 to 20, knowing it may beat us.
You don't want to freak people out too much.
They're going, hey, that guy said 10 years, and like it happened in 5. Like, oh,
Yeah. But, I think enterprise adoption of that is going to be slower just because, as we know, enterprise is because there are so many other considerations that you have.
Oh, 100%. I'm talking about consumerization of this technology. Enterprise.
That's super fast, right?
So when I was that question was really setting up AI in the consumer space. Mm-hmm. There's AI in B2B and enterprise, but I think you're going to see some crazy stuff happen in the consumerization of AI and the startup community as well.
Yeah, startups for sure.
And academia.
Well, you can adopt these things without having all of the bureaucracy. Like, one of the things that I love about the size of our company is we're very agile and we can take on these innovative technologies simply because we don't have to get 100 different approvals from 100 different people. We still go through those same checks, right? We go through the legal check, we go through the compliance, we go through the security, but there aren't 100 people that you have to talk to. It's 2 or 3 people that wear those hats and do it very well. But because of the size of the organization, we can do it a lot faster and we can adopt these. So I think that we're absolutely going to see a lot of this in the startup space, in the small business space, where, to your point, you're going to be able to own and have these AI agents. And maybe they're even AI agents that you've created with your special view of the world that make you a superhuman. And that's going to be really fascinating. But, to your point on the consumer side of things, it also brings up a couple of interesting questions. The data sovereignty conversation is an important one to have. I think the other thing that's important to have is thoughts around the protection of that AI. And I'm not talking about protection from the standpoint of like, is it going to harm you or is somebody else going to hack it? Those things are obviously important. But more so what I'm talking about is protection from the standpoint of making sure that you don't lose your AI. Because, if I just look at like computers as an example, right? We've had computers really since the 1950s, 1960s. By the 80s, we got into the PC era with Dell and the other companies that launched PC brands. We're now 2024. So we've got 60 plus years of computer history And there are still people, and it's not a bad thing, it's just it's a technology literacy challenge. There are still people that don't know how to back up their PC. Right. Like when I was younger, one of the services that I provided to the parents and working people in my neighborhood was backup services, PC break fix support, upgrades, things of that nature. And the number of people that lost their data because they simply didn't know how to plug in a backup device, it's astronomical. And you start to see companies like Apple, and I'm sure Android has something equivalent, maybe. Apple certainly does with iCloud backup, where it will back up your device to the cloud every single night. And there are starting to be things that are like baked around this concept. But depending on how you manage your AI locally, let's say you have an AI best friend, and we can talk about all of what that means. Maybe
By the way, someone told me I need to go watch that movie, Her.
I haven't seen it either. Yeah,
I know, but everyone references that. I'm gonna have to put that on my Netflix or whatever review that one of my friends like, hey, you gotta watch that.
What happens if you have an AI? That AI is your best friend, and then your phone or whatever gets stolen, and you didn't do the cloud backup, and like you had a 5 or 10 year relationship with this AI who became somebody that you actually care a whole lot about because of the way that humans work, and it's gone forever.
Oh, I even think about that. Forget like this. So back to the previous discussion about building a customized AI, like let's say an agency. Like say I was like one of the the best scientists with my AI agents. That is intellectual property. Mm-hmm. That's your IP. And when you have access to it, I mean, it's interesting now because the power that you can unleash and the power you can harness through years of learning how to train, harness, and train these models, that opens up a whole new, thing of, so losing your laptop, don't lose. And if you have things local to the device,
you got to back it up.
You got to back it up and you got to protect it and you got to have copies of it. Mm-hmm. The other thing I think about, and I'm married to a reformed attorney. She doesn't practice anymore, but we talk about but it brings up a lot of interesting legality, like copyright law, IP protection. There's all these things that still have to get worked out. And I know we're kind of we're in that phase of I'm sure there will be court cases of infringement on copyright protection, digital humans, people, because you can do it. Doesn't mean you should, but there's going to be a lot of people that use AI for probably not good purposes. Mm-hmm. How do you think? What do you think? And maybe we may need to pick this up on the next one, but maybe we'll end on this. What do you think government? And this is a big one. We're in the U.S., so for those that may be watching out, there's different viewpoints on how much government control versus letting the corporations operate on this AI, because it can be interesting. And I haven't really thought about it. Like, I've heard about this AI Bill of Rights they were talking about. I've never even thought about that. What are your thoughts on that?
So I've spent quite a bit of time thinking about that. And I have a couple of thoughts that I'll tee it up with. The first one is, I'm an artist at heart. I've produced films. I've produced music. I'm not a musician, but I can produce music. I can tell people that are really talented.
We're going to make you sing on the next one or play. You play an instrument, John? I never asked you that.
No, I don't. I used to be in like choir in like 7th grade, but that's a whole other thing. So, I paint. I've written a book. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about this whole concept of copyright and what that means in the AI space. And there were a lot of cases and discussions in the media over the last year around the right to train the AI off of the data that exists out there. And I'm torn for a number of reasons, but some of the things that surprised me as I went through this thought process were even illuminating to me. The first one is I open sourced or made openly available the book that I wrote. Like, I'd still like people to pay money for it. That'd be awesome. But the way that I wrote the book, it's a personal development and self-discovery book. It's all about asking yourself complex and difficult questions that most people don't spend any time exploring about themselves. Like, what actually makes them happy? What core beliefs do they have about the world around them, and why do they actually have those beliefs? What would they do in their worst circumstances? Like if the worst thing that you could imagine happened to you right now, whether that's a loved one dying, or you lost your house, or whatever keeps you up at night, or the things that you don't want to think about that happen, like ask yourself, how would you handle that situation? The reason that these questions are important is because when you start to capture and document your own answers to those questions, it really opens up a level of relief and discovery about yourself that you may not necessarily have or have the confidence to have until you actually spend the time to think about it. Anyway, those things and those questions, there are 183 of them in the book overall. And so I love sharing them with people. And so I did a couple of things with that book. I actually posted the entire book to my X account, formerly Twitter. So the whole book is there. It's the pinned to my profile as the top one, and people can read it freely. Like, yeah, I'd like you to buy the book, but I'd rather people, benefit from the advice. The other thing that I did to kind of hopefully preserve this for future generations is I also inscribed the entire book into the Bitcoin blockchain. So it's there.
Okay.
In perpetuity.
Wow.
So we can talk about that. Maybe
you say you're an artist, but I can say you're kind of that's really, I mean, I'll say this as a badge of honor. That's kind of nerdy, John. That's very nerdy. I mean,
yeah, it is.
Yeah. Wow.
But my point is that, like, if somebody wants to use that to help train the next AI model,
no, it's cool.
I want them to, because I made it to help people. And, I don't want somebody else reprinting it for like financial gain in the direct sense. But if somebody in the world is having a really tough time and they don't have anybody to talk to, and maybe some part of the potential wisdom that I wrote in that book somehow gets encoded into the large language model that helps answer that person and helps talk them off the ledge, or maybe helps them get the assistance or the support emotionally that they need to work through that tough time, that's awesome, right? And the same thing could be true and said about art, right? Everybody in the art world is a thief. You take inspiration from everything that you see around you. And so we could spend a whole lot of time.
And one thing I'll leave you, that's your next company. I just got your next idea. Like, you could build an AI therapist based on this questions, where you could literally don't have to read it. You can actually talk. And I know they've been talking, a lot of people, that's not a new thing. There are people actually using the AI to work through things, whether it's ideate on that next great novel. And it is also, I've watched this, and we need to bring this to a close, but even my own kids, like, I tell them, you got to use AI, you got to learn how to, adapt it and adopt. And they're kind of slow to use it. And I know there's been this reticence in education, but at the end of the day, you need to learn how to work with it and make you better. Don't use it to not think. Use it to increase the ability to think and create. And I think that bias that a lot of people are going, well, did you write it or the AI wrote it? Going, does it matter? And I say that to be a little controversial, going, I love to write, but if you enjoyed what you just read and I co-created with an AI, who cares?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's going to continue to evolve in our society.
Yeah. So conversations for next time. I want to talk about education and what that means. I want to spend a little bit more time on the concepts around this whole copyright and ownership and what that means. And I think it would also be fun to talk about the political implications of this technology, both from a campaign standpoint, because we're in election season now, but also just holistically.
We are? I didn't know we were in election season.
Yeah,
no, right. Wait, really?
Yeah,
I never hear anything. No, I know. Let's do it.